Good morning and welcome to Recipe for Success. My name is Nancy Giacalone with Olympic Crest Insurance, and my guest today is Esther Pipoly. For any of you that are joining me for the very first time, Recipe for Success was created because of my love of cooking, my love of business, my love of learning. And one thing that I discovered is that every single recipe that I made always had one key ingredient or technique that was very critical to the outcome or the success of the recipe. And just like in cooking, the same thing is true in business and in life. There's always one thing that can really help you succeed. So I've taken this and talked to some amazing leaders across the country. And for the last few months, I've really been focusing on women doing remarkable things in their lives or in business. And today I am so incredibly grateful to have Esther join us. Esther is the founder of Loss of Life Advocates, and I'd like to welcome you and introduce yourself to our audience a little bit.
Thank you for having me straight to you from San Antonio, Texas. Home of the Spurs and the best tacos. I'm sure people in Austin would argue with me. But my name is Esther Pipoly. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be sharing time with you today. Born and raised in San Antonio, and I have a background of insurance for over 20 plus years as an account manager. 1 year I was a broker, cried every day. I have a lot of respect for brokers. So I tried it, didn't work out for me. But I have a really strong background in employee benefits, which I think as account managers, we are what makes a good team work well to have success together. So I'm excited to be on your show.
100% account. We could not do it without account managers. It literally takes a village in this industry to do our jobs. So your company has a very critical and unique mission, and that's to help others with the loss of a loved one. So I'd really like you to share your personal story, which is very difficult. And so I really appreciate you being willing to share it, your personal story and what prompted you to start this company.
Sure. It's, everything in the world in your life happens for a reason. And, people hate when people used to say that, oh, it happens for a reason. But in 2013, I kind of have to go back to there. 2013, my dad got really sick. And in that same year, my husband of 20 some odd years had decided our last child had graduated and gone off to college, graduated from college. And he said, I really want to go sail around the world. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? He was like, no, do what you want to do. And I was like, well, I think I'd like to move maybe to Denver, where we get 4 seasons. It'll be fun and find an account management job. So a huge shout out to David Mao in San Diego, who was my recruiter that found me a job in downtown Denver with an amazing agency. I was part of a self-funded team, and all in that same kind of window of all these opportunities coming together, my father got sick, and he walked into the emergency room. And a little background, my daddy was the president for AARP for the state of Texas for 5 years, very independent, college professor, business executive. So I used to have to make an appointment to get on his calendar. So the day he called me and said, hey, I don't feel good. Can you pick me up and take me to the hospital? He had his luggage packed to go to the hospital. So I knew he wasn't just going in and out. But he ended up getting very, very ill and was in ICU for 21 days. And that same day, I'd signed my acceptance letter to go to downtown Denver and work. And so it was one of those like aha moments. But before my dad went into surgery, he said, whatever you do, don't stop. You're on a trajectory, follow your dream. You've got a career path, go do it. But stay in your lane. And I think that was really good advice. Like, don't worry about me. Whatever happens, you can do this. And by the way, I want to invoke my durable power of attorney. And at the time, I was like, well, what does that really mean?
Right.
You're paying bills, you're talking to doctors, you're making all decisions. So after 21 days and moving into Colorado, driving out of Texas, going to Colorado, starting a new job, severe migraines, meeting new people, having to gel with a new team in a new city. My dad, ended up getting into an assisted living facility and never went home. And so I flew back and forth 18 times from Denver to San Antonio. And our good friend, Esther Pipoly, who I have to always thank for everything because she's amazing.
We love Allison.
Yeah, she would call me and check in. Are you okay? Are you doing all right? What do you need? And you need people like that around you to just kind of ground you. But my dad passed away in July of 2014. And it was hard making decisions and starting a new job and living in a new city. And my marriage, people would say, wow, you were in going from San Antonio to Denver, where was your husband? Well, he was back in San Antonio trying to wrap up his law business so that he could prepare to sail around the world. But unfortunately, the day we buried my father, my husband said, I'm not going to go to the little lunch thing because I don't feel good. And I remember just kind of whipping my head around and going, wow, you really look painfully thin. And he said, yeah, I don't feel good, but I didn't want to bother you about it because you've been taking care of your dad. And so when I finally got my eyes on my husband, 10 days late from the day my dad died, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So hopping forward 50 days, my husband ended up going to Tijuana with our daughter, who was 24 at the time. It was fourth quarter. So, it was kind of like, hey, we really need you. Can you please stay? And I made some decisions that I really kind of regretted because I didn't realize that was going to be the last 2 weeks of my husband's life. And he passed away, and I ended up having to shut down a law practice. And I was in Texas, and I wasn't in Denver. And my boss was like, "Hey, you used up all your PTO," and everybody was just in a craze, right? It was very, very chaotic. And I learned really quickly that even with all the best benefits that you could have in place and 1-800 numbers and checklists that are given to you, it is still not enough. You need a person to walk you through all the work that has to be done before, during, and after a loss. And so that really was the start of LOLA. But more importantly, my husband's life insurance didn't pay immediately. I had to file a lawsuit and go through a really treacherous 840 days of trying to settle that. And once I did, the lawyers who fought for me and got me to the finish line of my husband's life, handed me a check, and I said, this is all I have left. So what do I do with it? So my company, LOLA, named after my mom, strongest woman that I know or have ever had in my life. And she was my first death. I decided I was going to go out on a limb and try something new and try to start a new benefit that would help families and employers and business owners with all the details that they need to be prepared and for all the things that they need to know about what to say, when to say it. Those conversations are hard. And I know that just from my own personal experiences, I worked for an amazing agency in Denver, and the HR people just didn't know what to do with me. I mean, I was a mess. And in that moment, when I came out of everything, I realized that there was so much to learn and so much to teach, that those were teachable moments. And so that's what I do. I help employers. I help families. I help business owners. And we do all the work that everybody else doesn't do. We walk the cemeteries. We go to the funeral homes with families. We negotiate the fees ahead of time. We've worked with families that have lost babies. We've worked with families that have lost children in house fires. We've helped employers when there's been suicides. So there really isn't any loss that we have not worked with in these last 5 years.
So this is just so interesting. So I lost my father earlier this year, and as a matter of fact, as soon as we finish this episode, I'm literally hopping in my car and driving 2.5 hours to go meet with my stepmom, a banker, an attorney, somebody. I've got 3 appointments scheduled back to back to back because that was in February. The estate still isn't closed, and there's just so much stuff. And I'm a pretty organized person and pretty much able, I always thought, pretty much able to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And his estate was organized. I mean, he had a living will and trust. I mean, but still there's just so much stuff. It is hard to wrap your head around it. I never knew that even an organization or a service like yours existed. But the other thing that I would like to point out is, as an employer, especially a small employer, I remember having an employee whose significant other died, and she was a complete disaster. And I did not know how to deal with it appropriately because, again, you get to the point of all the PTOs used up. You're a small business. You're like, I have to have a person doing this job. I don't want to be unkind. I don't want to be unsympathetic. How do I handle this? I can't just pay you indefinitely because I don't have those type of resources. So how do you work with employers? I would imagine it's easier to work with a larger employer because they have they have more resources. But let's say you are a smaller employer dealing with that situation. What are some suggestions?
Well, I always when an employee comes to me and they do work for a small employer, I will ask for permission to contact their employer and say, can I just contact them and talk to them and share what my services are? And more than likely, 100% of the time when I tell the employer, look, it's important that this person shows up to work and they're present. We can take all of the detail work that they're trying to navigate through off their plate. And we are a consultative service. So you can buy our services for 5 hours, 10 hours, and just consider us an arm to that employee so that they come to work, they're able to focus on their work. We also talk to them about, what to say and when to say it and how to have those conversations. So, we coach the employer and the employee through having the difficult conversation and using the right words, because words do matter. And yeah, it is hard when somebody says, look, I'm a small business. I can't afford to keep you on board. You're showing up, but you're not showing up. And there's only so much of this that I can handle. Having an advocate to step in and say, okay, let's talk about what words we can use to make this a more effective and soft place, because as an employer, you spend so much time training employees, you putting resources into them because they're the right person for the job. And then they're going through this loss and they're not the same person. And, loss, what it does for sure is it changes people. They are not the same person that they were before. And so when the employer can finally get their brain wrapped around, how do I talk to them? How do I communicate with them? And when they find out there's a resource like us to say, we can go and help empty the house out, pack it up. We can talk with foundation repair people. If you need to get the house ready for sale, we can talk with the cleaners. We have resources. We have lawyers. We can do all that footwork for you, even down to, you know what, Mr. Employer, you have medical insurance. Let me see if I can talk the employee into utilizing their mental health benefits. So a lot of times those small businesses will say they don't have an HR person. So they'll come to me and say, hey, can I pay you 5 hours to convince them that they really need to take advantage of this benefit? And 90% of the time, the employees go, thank you so much, because I forgot I had EAP. I forgot I have mental health benefits, or I was thinking about it, but I can't make those phone calls. We'll make the phone calls. Having the benefits background does help, because we're able to look at that, call United Healthcare, Humana, or Aetna.
100%, yeah.
You know what? And make the phone calls, because what are we running into right now, especially, is the lack of having the manpower to help. So an employee's leaving messages, trying to get in, trying to get the help, all on the dime of the employer. So when we take that off of them and we find them 2 different resources and say, look, I've called, I've talked to the counselor, they can see you, they're accepting new patients, they take your insurance, this is what the copay is going to be. These are the 2 available time slots. Tell me which one you want, and I will call and confirm the appointment for you. So it's kind of like a personal assistant to both the employer and to the employee. But from the very beginning, I would just say, to answer your question, as a business owner, finding resources to help you so that you don't have to do that. And there's so many wonderful HR programs out there for small businesses now that I think that what we do complements that.
Sure.
So from a business standpoint, having the patience, but also looking for the resources to use the right words, because you don't want to lose the employee.
No, you don't. And generally, you care about that employee. I mean, you don't want to make their situation harder. So you're kind of in a catch-22. So that's a really good point. And it's really good to know you have that resource is available. So I want to flip it to the other side. And again, because I've just walked down this path in the last year, not to the extent that you did, but when you're the one in charge of making sure everything gets taken care of, there's not a lot of space to process your own feelings because you're too busy getting stuff done. Right. What do you say to the person in charge? And because it might not be the person who's listed on the sheet, might not be the executor of the state, because sometimes it's just there's a person that is naturally more gifted in doing those things and will tend to take charge. What do you say to that person as far as stepping back and processing feelings and reaching out for help and support?
First of all, whenever I talk to widows or children that are, left with managing the estate after both parents have passed away, the first thing I ask them is, have you been to your own primary care doctor? Have you gone to take care of yourself? Because this is going to be a marathon. Probate in Texas, 4 years if you're a business owner. I had to wait. I held my breath for 4 years when my husband passed away because he had his own business. But the very first thing I always ask them is, have you been to the doctor to get benchmarked? Because you're now no longer that same person. your health is under siege. The grief is taking over. Paying attention once you've gone to the doctor and they can benchmark you, whether you need some type of help, whether it's medication or the doctor can say, you know what, maybe you should spend some time doing yoga, processing those feelings and paying attention to what your body is telling you. So when people are going through having to clean out a house, or you're having to get ready for this conversation you're going to have today with these multiple professionals that are going to help you and guide you through closing down your dad's estate, paying attention to what is your body saying. And it's amazing how many people say, well, I've had a lot of stomach aches. And I'm like, okay, that's when you stop. You step back and you take a minute. I'm certified with the grief recovery method, and a lot of their method is in listening and being able to process through, because it's like a broken arm. Grief is no different than if you were to break your arm or break your leg. How long would you take to go get attention taken care of? Go to the emergency room, go see a doctor. Grief is the same way. You need to have help immediately. So starting with your primary care doctor, and if you're at a large employer or even a small employer or mid-size, if you have access to short-term disability, whenever I'm talking to employers, I'm like, please offer life insurance and short-term disability, because there's benefits for grief and help an employee during that period of time. But going to that primary care, getting benchmarked, and then seeking the mental health benefits, not being afraid to say, hey, I need help. But usually when it's that one person, they're kind of masking, right? They're masking those feelings because they're used to being in control, but really being able to listen and to say to yourself, you know what, that headache or that my eyesight went really bad after my husband died. I could not look at an Excel spreadsheet. I was really bad at Excel, by the way. My former employer she'd be like, she'd roll her eyes at me. But I was an account manager. I was the people person. I was really great at people skills. But at the same time, if my stomach was hurting, I was like, oh, there's a reason for that. What am I feeling? What am I going through? The physical, like bruising. I've been across people that have bruises, and I'm like, what is that from? And they're like, oh, I ran into something. Your body is like, it's tingly, right? Your grief is like your hair standing up on end. And I always recommend that when people find out that, you've had a loss, our natural reaction is to hug somebody. And not everybody, when they're going through grief, wants to be touched. And that is one thing through the grief recovery method. They've taught us, like, do not touch somebody, ask them for permission if you feel compelled to want to hug them. But, paying attention as the decision maker, doing little bits and pieces at a time. It is not a race to the finish line. There are a lot of families that immediately want to go clean out, get things done, get the house listed. They want to see money coming in. They want to get it off. They want to get this part of whatever's happened in their life past them. And it is a process, and you need to be patient and listen to your bodies, because I think that I would believe in my heart that there is a strong correlation between grief and high blood pressure, because I live in that world.
I can believe that. You just brought up something so interesting, and I would have never thought of it, is to have that baseline check with your doctor after a loss so that you can monitor what's happening with you. That's just brilliant advice. I will share that with anyone that I come into contact with in the future on that one. That's really good advice.
Even as an employer, that's something that as brokers, as advisors and consultants, that they should be saying, to their employers, hey, if you have a loss, the first thing, if they're on your medical insurance, tell them before they come back to work, go see your doctor, get yourself benchmarked, because then you're not going through this in and out thing.
Yep.
Come back to work, that you're actually taking that extra step to say, I really want to make sure that you're 100%. I'm not going to make it like you have to do it. But I think that as an employer, it shows that you care.
Oh, I agree. That's really, really great. Okay. Take a deep breath. I knew this was going to be an emotional one for me. So let's talk about some steps everyone should do to prepare for a death in their family. So maybe they see it coming. Maybe somebody is in assisted living or moving that direction, or to assist their family in the event of their own death. What are some practical things everybody should do?
Everybody always thinks that getting their legal documents is I've got it prepared. My financial advisor has it ready for me. The lawyer, I've got everything, all the documents ready. It's not that. I would tell you that, one, if you have your legal documents ready, that's great. Also have a bank account set up for whoever your executor is, to have money set aside to bury you, if you haven't prepaid or pre-planned your funeral, or to cremate you, having money for probate. If you have a will or a trust, chances are you're still going to have to go through a probate court. That can be costly. In Texas, if you have a will, it can be about $2,000 to $3,000. So then you have an estate and your executor going, where am I going to come up with this money? Right? Because I'll be your executor, but where am I going to find $3,000? And so people get caught with that, or they go to the funeral home and things aren't prepared and they're having to look at the money situation. Bank accounts, if your banks are not styled correctly, when they find out that the person has passed away, they will freeze accounts. And even if there's a POD, payable on death, assigned to that account, nothing gets touched until there's a death certificate. And nowadays, even the letter of testamentary. So really being able to set up your executor or whoever's in charge with, make sure the banking is set up correctly, make sure there's an account set up correctly, not just your legal documents. Many people get confused that the power of attorneys die with that person. And then the executor doesn't start until probate comes into play and you're appointed as an executor. So there's that window of really awkward uncomfortableness of time, where people are like, well, okay, so mom died, the house is empty. What does that mean? I don't like my brother. He just moved in, he's squatting. All these family things come into play. So really having that conversation ahead of time with your loved ones to say, you know what, in the event something happens to me, this is what I want done. I also recommend, if you're going to if it's the last parent to die, change the locks on the house. It's not to lock everybody out. It's just to say, you know what, we're all going to get new locks. We're going to rekey the house so that nobody goes in and gets something. I've had friends that have had gun collections, or all of their dad's suits or memorabilia just disappear.
Yeah.
And the family's like, oh my God, how do I confront this person? Or how do I, so there are things like that. Having the conversation, having your banking, having something set up, your funeral arrangements, of course, if you're a veteran, having your DD 214, which is your discharge papers, somewhere where your family can find them so they can get them to the funeral home is important. Otherwise, your loved one is not going to be able to be buried at the military site. So, that's something else to think about. There's so many. I could go on. The list just kind of goes on and on and on, because depending on when families come to me, if it's a diagnosis with cancer, one of the first things I say is, where are the passwords? Who's going to pay for stuff? Even during COVID, people would go in, and I was on a call with a gentleman here in San Antonio, and he said, I knew I was going into the emergency room and I could potentially die. And he was one of the very first COVID patients in San Antonio that was seriously ill, was pretty popular person here. But he said he sat down for an hour and told his wife where everything was. And it wasn't until that moment that he's like, here I am thinking I'm going to die. And I have a will, but I was calling my best friends and saying, hey, if something happens to me, can you help my wife? And then I always tell people when they say my financial advisor will take care of my wife, I'm like, how well do you know your financial advisor?
Yeah, that's been really interesting. Like I say, my dad had everything pretty well in order. However, his wife didn't really have a clue about any of it. They had never really communicated about where all the finances were, or what, how everything was set up. Fortunately, or unfortunately, they did have a little book with all the passwords written down in it. So, we were able to access things. But when you speak about the financial advisors, that was another issue that we encountered, because they immediately descend kind of like locusts on the surviving spouse to make sure that they're going to still retain that business. And one of the first things one of them did before I told her not to do it was they took my dad off the account, because he had, was deceased. And it's like, he wasn't supposed to be taken off any of the accounts, because until the estate is closed, in the event anything needed to be done. And then of course it had ended up becoming a little bit of an issue. So since I'm going to see the attorney today, what are some key, and we're almost done, but what are some key questions or things that people should think to ask right away? What are the first questions that, okay, maybe they're not prepared, somebody has passed, and now they have to figure things out. Obviously they need to call a funeral home, and they probably need to call an attorney. So what are their very, very first steps?
I always tell people, what's your budget? Before your loved one is even passed away, if you know they're going to be passing away and it's impending, right? You're hours away from it, or the doctors have told you Then we're making them comfortable. We're giving them morphine. We're easing them into the transitional phase. Having the conversation about budget is really important before you have your loved one picked up and taken into a funeral home's care. I partner with a lot of funeral homes. I have a lot of respect for them, but I also have a lot of respect for clients that don't have the budget and end up having to take out of their own personal 401ks or take loans out, or finance a funeral service when they can find out, like in San Antonio, if you're in hospice and you die on hospice care, there is a funeral home that can cremate your loved one with no services, direct cremation for $499. It may be $499, $599. It may have gone up during COVID. But there are, knowing the budget is super important. And then when you reach out to an attorney, asking them, okay, so you give 1 hour of consultation. I want to come in and interview you. I always recommend interview a couple of different attorneys before you are set with one. I went through almost 3 probate attorneys before I found the right one, because everybody was willing to take my money, but they weren't communicating to me. I didn't understand what probate meant. I didn't understand what my role as an executor was. So being able to sit down with an attorney and say, explain this to me, make sure you have a good relationship with them, that you feel like there's good communication between you and them, because eventually attorneys get busy. You stop getting phone calls with them. Maybe you don't even get invoices. You just get hey, it's time for another retainer fee to be filled. Mm-hmm. So I need more money. And you're like, well, what did you do? So having those 3, interviews with attorneys to shop for price. So shopping for price for funerals, shopping for prices for attorneys. The fees vary. And when an attorney, you tell them, hey, I'm interviewing 2 or 3 just to make sure, I guarantee you they're going to be very happy to accommodate whatever financing you need. Hey, most of them will start out at $4,000 to $5,000. I just got finished helping a client up in Seattle. And so I did that for her. She got recommendations from friends for attorneys, and I made the phone calls and said, okay, tell me what your process is. Tell me your interview. Tell me your face-to-face. We're in COVID. What can she expect? How long is this going to take? So even that, when you're talking with attorneys, asking them, how long is this process going to be? Because I need to tell if there's other heirs, hey, I'm not going to be giving money out until all the debts are paid. When the attorney tells me that I can have free and clear, that's when I'm going to be writing the check. So really having a clear understanding of what your duties are as an executor, and having the understanding of what attorneys are going to do for you, what their communication style is, and how long it's going to take. And then, of course, when somebody's going to pass away, having that open line of communication with the hospice company or the hospital, and then knowing what your budget is going into a funeral, because that is a very big expense. And I've walked people through and done assignment of life insurance from an employer to a funeral home, and telling a widow, the life insurance is assigned. You can go in there, and just so you know, whatever you don't spend comes back to you. And so then all of a sudden they look at that $25,000 employer paid life insurance on their husband and go, okay, so if I spend $5,000, I get $20,000 back, which I need for me and my kids.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's talk about another couple of practical matters. What about when there's a business involved? So you went through that with your husband. I have a business, which I do not have partners. So if something were to happen to me, how does that, what are the next steps? I'm married, so my husband would, of course, but he's not actively involved. So what are practical steps for business owners?
So right now I'm actually working with a lady whose husband passed away in San Antonio, and he was a pest control. He owned a pest control company. She was operations. He was the front end of the company. And fortunately, when he passed away, she is now the CEO of the company. So having to look at what the formation of their business is, right? So as a business owner, if you're trying to prepare ahead of time, you're looking at the protocols of an office. Something happens to you. What communication do you want to go out? 1, to your employees, 2, to your clients, because you don't want to lose clients when they find out that you've passed away.
Right.
3, what is your formation? If you have an LLC and you don't have 2 people in that company, even if one person has 1% of that LLC, that is enough for one person to be able to take over the business if something happens to you. So having the appropriate conversation with your CPA and with your attorney to have a legacy plan in place as to what will happen, having the conversations with your key employees to say, look, if something happens to me, if I'm in a car accident and I'm not coming back to work, here's the communication that's going to go out to the employees. Here's who's going to be the key person that's going to disseminate the information to our clients. And we don't want anybody making stories up. because it's real easy for us to scare our clients with Nancy's been in a car accident. Oh my God, we don't know when she's coming back. And all of a sudden
Right.
freaking out versus the account manager. There's one document that goes out an email. It's, it's worded correctly. Everything's fine. We wish Nancy the best of health, but until she's back, this is your key person to contact. Business as usual. So really coming up with a communication plan, coming up with the protocols. If you pass away, do you want all the credit cards canceled? Do you want, you have to find out what your employees are working on. So yeah, having those steps in place. We have a business protocol plan, which we walk through business owners with, which is based off of my husband's closing down his office because I canceled his malpractice insurance. Guess what? He had a lawsuit filed against him after his death. And the first thing the probate attorney asked me, did you cancel the malpractice insurance? I was like, yes, I did. He's like, you shouldn't have done that until probate's over. So just those little things like walking a business owner through who's your banker, who's on the accounts, who's going to make payroll. That was the other thing. I got to make payroll for my husband's law office for at least 2 or 3 cycles while he was sick and after he passed away until I could close down the office. What is your desire for your business? Who have you talked to in your industry that would say, you know what, I'll take it over if? What communication, what type of partnerships are you talking to your industry professionals about wanting to move the business over if something happens to you, whether it's a disability and you're not going to be back at work for a while, or whether you pass away, what that legacy is so that your family, your husband doesn't lose the income and the hard work that you put into your business. Because that's what happens. I did not know that the $300,000 in outstanding invoices that were due to my husband through judgments, people owing him money, and clients and settlements was my job as the executor to go after for the business. I had no idea. So I think from a business owner standpoint, walking them through, we have to have these difficult conversations. You're not going to want to have to, make a decision today, but you need to let your wife know. You need to let your key people know what's going to happen in the event you're disabled or you pass away. What's going to happen to the business?
It's amazing points, and it's definitely something I'm going to be bringing up with my clients because, and taking some of those tips in for myself as well. Really fantastic. All right, so this one's a little personal and a hard one for a lot of people. What happens to pets? What do people need to think about if they have pets?
Yeah, that's like you love your animals, right? Your
Yeah.
footed friends that never let you down. You know what? Fostering. So 2 things I will say. An attorney very early on was like, what's really popular right now is that people are buying life insurance policies and they're setting up pet trust. So they're asking a friend, if something happens to me, will you take my pets? And you will receive the life insurance. It'll go through a pet trust, and that is to pay for vet bills, food, and taking care of them. Usually friends will say, sure, no problem, because they're hoping that nothing really happens to you. But that is one goal that you can set aside for your pets so that they are taken care of after you're gone. The other thing is, looking at fostering, who's going to foster if you're sick and in the hospital. There's plenty of, pet fosterers out there we work with here in Texas that work all over the state of Texas for us when there's a loss. And then, of course, talking to family members and saying, hey, if something happens to me, would you be willing to take my animals? You'll find out really quickly who your friends are and who the ones like, I have 4 dogs. I don't think I can handle anymore. Yeah. So it's a chore, and your animals do grieve. That is one thing that I've walked into homes and the families are like, my dad, this was his dog, and the dog won't get off the bed. We're having a hard time. It's walking around. It looks like it's not doing well. I'm like, take him to the vet. Let the vet know, because the vet needs to be in contact and, see if they can take care of the animal. It could be an underlying condition with your pets. So take care of them as well as getting yourself to a doctor. Get your pets to a doctor.
Wonderful advice. So 2020 and 2021, I think have made grief, have amplified it. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for, because of the isolation that occurred in many cases, the inability to have a funeral for some people. People couldn't get to each other to support each other in going through difficult situations. I think it's been really challenging, and I think a lot of people are carrying around a lot of grief, not only for the death of loved ones, but also loss of normality. So I think it's really amplified it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. When you open a seltzer bottle and it's going to explode.
Yes.
Quickly tighten it up. That's kind of how I feel like a lot of people went through COVID and grief during COVID. There were some families that there were a number of people that were referred to us for suicides that had happened in 2019, maybe 2018, beginning of 2020. And then all of a sudden they had to go home, and work from home. And all of a sudden they're in the space that they have to process and feel, and they're working from that. So I would always tell people, like, imagine that you're that seltzer bottle. There's two things that need to happen. One, you need to let that go. As much as we want to stop it, you see somebody crying, oh, stop, no, don't cry. You need to let people to process, because a lot of us have been just bottled up, and we need to let that lid go and let our emotions come out and grieve the life that we had in 2020, early 2020 and 2019, because there are people that are no longer with us. For every person that passes away, there's at least five people that are affected. So if it's not five family members, it could also be five employees, coworkers. And with coworkers not being able to be around each other when we lost a coworker to COVID, or to maybe something that was affected by COVID, it was non-related through mental health or something else, we tend to bottle it up. And so I kind of look at grief as what we're all going through is we're a bunch of bottled up seltzer bottles. And we're seeing it.
A good description.
Right? We're seeing it in airports with people having, short tempers, and we're seeing it in restaurants, and we're seeing it more and more as people start kind of doing this cannonball approach of, we were all at home and all of a sudden it was like back to work, and, it's like being shot out of a cannon, so people are not they weren't paying attention. They were just going through working. We did not have the downtime between our appointments from travel to be able to have a client appointment and then travel that 15 or 10 minutes to the next appointment to kind of, what was that all about?
Yep.
Right? So when you were on Zoom and we're going, for a lot of people, they just stacked their lives. They made it so compacted that they did not allow themselves to have those moments of, I'm not sure what I'm feeling, but it feels weird. Or hearing that a coworker that you sat next to, who's now at home or passed away, that I can't even tell them something that to tell them how special I thought they were.
Right.
And then I can't go tell their spouse. So really crazy times. I will say that through grief for me, I've spent a lot of time calling random people that I don't normally call, people that are in my phone system. They're like, hey, I was just calling to check on you. How you holding up? One of my best friends is a hospice worker, and he does that to me once or twice a week. How you holding up? It's Tuesday. We got through Monday. How you holding up? Having those people around you to do the check-ins. Esther Pipoly again, she checks in on me, and sometimes she'll say, I have 2 minutes until I have to get on a call. How you doing? Great, no problem. Great. Talk to you later. You need to have those people around you, because especially during the last 18 months, we've done nothing but bottle ourselves up. So if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling like you need to process something, let yourself process. And if you see somebody and they start to cry, ask for permission if you want to hug them, if you want to console them. But most importantly, hand them a box of Kleenex. I always use my purse and just say, here, put it next to them and say, don't just let them go, because that is like the start and stop. We're starting, we're stopping, we're starting, we're stopping. And I know that I don't like to cry in front of people, but when I do, it scares my kids. Because they're like, oh, wow, where did that come from? So I think that from the grief standpoint, really paying attention to ourselves and doing our own check-in and saying, am I that seltzer bottle? Because I'm feeling like I could probably top off on somebody and it's all because I'm just not letting it go.
It's been interesting to me, because some of the people that have stepped up were people I didn't even know that well, to be perfectly honest, but they saw a need, and they just kind of, like you said with Allison, and she checked in on me as well. But I mean, just that nice little brief check-in, I don't know, it kind of reset me. It made me feel okay. It was like, okay, I'm not alone.
Right.
It's all good. So, all right. So deep breath. We're going to move on to the funner. We could really go for a very long time, but in the interest of time, we will move on.
Mm-hmm.
So, every one of my shows always ends with my 5 burning questions, and they're lighthearted, to kind of wrap it up on a fun note. So I always start with, tied into the name of the podcast, what's your favorite food and can you cook it?
Oh, yeah. I love enchiladas de mole, and it's
Mm.
something that was my mom's love language, as my daughter-in-law says. So I can cook it, and usually Christmas Eve, people that say all year long that they don't like it are knocking on my door trying to get it. So that would be my favorite food.
Awesome. Okay. So, what is the one character trait that you admire most in other people and why?
Oh, honesty, transparency. I would rather have somebody tell me, Esther, I'm not understanding what you do. I'm not understanding this, or I'm confused, or I'm feeling this way. And can you help me? Honesty to me is a great trait. And I find that most of my friends that are in my circle are the ones that I can say to them, be honest. And they know, okay, yeah, I need to be honest with you because I don't, you don't want to have people around you that are always yes people.
Right.
You need to have those honest, transparent people around you to say, that wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst,
Yeah.
and give you good constructive input for you.
Yeah. Okay. So, if I flip the mirror on you, what's the character trait that you admire most or that you're most proud of about yourself and why?
Oh, I would have to say my empathy for others. I can actually sit somewhere and feel that somebody's going through something by their body language, by their words, by their just the feelings, the way they're holding themselves. And I would say that going through everything that I went through and starting this company, and it is a true leap of faith to start something new and have to explain it to people and tell them this is how I compliment what you do. But in the moment when I'm with a family or somebody is hurting, the empathy that I'm able to offer to clients and to business owners and to employers, to make them feel like, you know what, I hear you and I see you and I understand because I've gone through this, but I know it's not the same because no two deaths are the same. But I'm here. So I think that my empathy is my strongest suit.
I love that. I could see it comes across. So, I definitely see that. Okay. Here's a fun one. So, if you were an animal, what would you be and why?
Oh my God, my son asked me that last night and I feel like it was from Ted Lasso because there was an episode or something. He was a panda or a lion, and I was like, well, I think I'd want to be a panda. So pandas, of course, Kung Fu Panda, one of my favorite cartoons that I share with my grandson. But pandas are protected, right? And they make everybody feel good, and you can't help but love them because they're cuddly. And I look for their gifts all the time to say hi to my friends, even if I don't have a long time to talk. So I would say the panda.
It's funny because I would have picked a panda or koala for you because you seem like somebody that kind of holds people close and helps them
Mhm.
through difficult situations. So that's after only 42 minutes. So that was pretty interesting. Okay. So, what is your secret talent or something people would be surprised to learn about you?
Oh wow. Something that a talent. I don't know. My son and my daughter would probably say my ability to laugh at myself and make people feel comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And I think that's kind of a talent to be able to say, "Oh, wow, wow."
Yeah.
But yeah, a talent. I'm not, I'm not athletic. I'll be the first person to tell you that. I leave my spin shoes in the bike because I can't get my feet
You
out of
can't unclip them.
like my son's like, I always know when you've done the Peloton. Um, so I'm not really athletic, but I think a good talent would be that I'm me. I'm quirky, and I don't mind laughing at myself, and I like making people feel good about themselves as well.
I love that. Okay, last question. Who's the one person that you've connected with on LinkedIn, or that you follow as, a podcast that you listen to that you would love to meet in real person? And before you answer it, our dear friend Allison weighed in and said, my most favorite, most generous, kindest people ever. So glad to see you two sharing your wisdom. So we love you, Allison. Okay,
Who
so
to meet. Wow. Well, the first person that he doesn't have a podcast yet, but I feel like he will soon is John Troutman.
don't we all love John?
Yeah, I love him. And so I feel like he's going to do a podcast soon. Somebody I would love to collaborate with. I'm just going to put it out into the universe right now. But, I mean, from a podcast standpoint, gosh, Mike McAllowitz, which I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with
No.
him, and He is kind of a business coach, and he talks about profit first and really coaching small businesses into making money, into being successful. So he is somebody that I really admire. He's not in our insurance circle, and so I would have to say that that would be kind of outside the loop. But there's a lot of awesome people. I love Paul Wilson with Benefits Pro. Of course, he's just amazing, and he's in one of my favorite cities, down Denver.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean that's kind of a hard one for me because I'm just now stepping into the podcast. I know Allison's been there for a while, and she's been doing it. She's a leader. Her and I we're so good at just kind of being side by side. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What did you spend money on? So I know she's been doing a podcast, and super happy for her. But no, I can't think of any. I'm hoping
you gave me like 3. I think you did amazing.
Thank you. I was like trying to get things on. You need to get the podcast going. Go. 1, 2, 3, go.
It's awesome. Well, I just really want to thank you for your time so much. I know that there were a lot of people that were excited to hear this. Kelly Ortega just weighed in. Excellent episode. Important information and resource. Thank you for sharing. I know there's people that personally had reached out to me that told me they were going to listen because they've gone through loss. I know that they probably uncomfortable sharing publicly, but hopefully this has touched a few people and that you found resources. Please reach out to Esther if you or somebody that's going through something like this. If for some reason you can't get in touch with Esther, reach out to me and I will connect you with her. But I think this is very valuable information and it's something that we need to talk about more. So thank you again so much, Esther, for joining us. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.